many of you know who Sigmund Freud is? How many of you know who Ivan Pavlov is? How many of you know who Martin Seligman is? Wow. Let me tell you about Martin Seligman. Penn State University, 1967. Dr. Seligman and his graduate students were very, very frustrated. It's the dogs. We did these experiments. We did the tone and gave them a mild shock. By the way, dog lovers, for the next 90 seconds, cover your ears, cover your eyes. We gave them the shock, and then we got that paired, classical conditioning, Pavlovian conditioning. We went to step 2 of the experiment, where we put them in a shuttle box. And when we do the shock, or when they hear the tone, all they have to do is jump over a little low barrier and they can escape the shock. But the darn dogs, they just sat there and whimpered. They made no effort to escape. And we couldn't go on with our experiment. Well then, in walked Marty Seligman. Now, Marty Seligman is a graduate student, and he's had considerable experience with depression. For one, he saw his father experience a series of strokes that left him miserably depressed and feeling very helpless. Dr. Seligman, I think I know what the problem is. I think these dogs have learned to be helpless. They've learned that no matter what they do, it's futile. It's not going to stop the shock. Well, I thought Marty was a little mashugana. Everybody knows that learning is stimulus response, Skinnerian learning. Dogs can't have abstract concepts. It's ridiculous. But Marty persisted. I was very bothered by the prospect of shocking dogs. I consulted with ethicists and with other colleagues, and I finally concluded that it was the only way to demonstrate a clinical model of what causes depression. So I devised a series of experiments and indeed demonstrated that what was happening here was the dogs were learning to be helpless. And I spent the next 10 years with various experiments to answer critics, the hard-headed Skinnerians, and demonstrate that this was learned helplessness. After about 10 years, I realized that there was a problem with the data. About 1 in 8 of these dogs who hadn't even had that prior training of the shocks, when you would put them in the shuttle box and shock them, they would just sit there and whimper. They were pessimists. And a third of the dogs, even if they'd had the shock training, you put them in the shuttle box and they hop right over. They were the optimists. The more I thought about this, I thought, maybe we can teach people how to be more optimistic. And I came up with a system for doing that. Well, let me tell you about Marty's system. Let's say that Travis gave a speech and his evaluator said, Travis, you had 20 ums and 10 you knows. Travis might think, oh my God, I'm mortified. I'm never going to learn how to be a good speaker. I never want to show my face in a Toastmaster meeting again. I'm failure. Or Travis might say, hey, you know, when I came here, I was the king of ums, and I've gotten a lot better. I know what I need to do. I'm improving. I'm getting good feedback. This is a safe place to learn. I'm thrilled that I'm here. The event was exactly the same. It was the interpretation that Travis makes that makes all the difference, whether it's a pessimistic interpretation or an optimistic interpretation. So I taught people how to be more optimistic, and I wrote a book about it. Word Optimism. And then I thought, I wonder if we can teach this to children. So I went into Abington Elementary School, a suburb of Philadelphia, and we identified at-risk kids for depression. These were kids who a family member had major depression, or maybe they had low self-esteem. And both the experimental and the control group, 24% of the kids already had depressive symptoms in the 5th and 6th grade. The experimental group, or the control group, just got before and after testing. The experimental group also got 20 hours of classroom instruction in how to be more optimistic, how to deal with low self-esteem, how to avoid depression. We went back 2 years later. The control group, 23% of the kids had depressive symptoms, practically the same as we started. The experimental group, 13%. Wow, imagine how much better our country would be, how much better our children would be if all of the at-risk children had the benefit of Seligman's training. Let me take you back to Seligman's childhood to give you a little more insight into his life. I was a good student in Albany, New York, and at that time, to get into one of the top universities, they were only recruiting from one school in the whole city, and that was the Albany Academy for Boys. So at considerable financial sacrifice, my parents paid tuition for me to go there. Wow, here I was, this chubby Jewish kid, in an institution that was primarily Protestants from multi-generational wealthy families. The few Jews that were there were extremely wealthy, and there were some very good Catholic athletes, and me didn't do much for my self-esteem. Matter of fact, when I ran for the president of the American Psychological Association in 1997, I figured I probably didn't have a chance. When I got the phone call, they said, "Marty, you won the election by a greater margin than anyone ever has in APA history." Then I had a quandary. I was unhappy with what was happening in the field of psychology, but as president, I needed to come up with a presidential theme. And I wasn't coming up with one. And week after week passed, and I was scratching my head and not coming up with anything. And then one day, I was pulling weeds in the garden, and my 5-year-old daughter came over to me and said, "Daddy, you remember when I was 3 years old? I was a whiny kid, and I didn't like being whiny. And I said, I'm going to get over that." And I did. And if I can get over being a whiny kid, you can get over being a grouch. Got me right here. She was right. Not only was I a grouch, I was a pessimist. And I used my own methods, trust me. But it was also an epiphany. That's what I'm going to do for my presidency. I'm tired of the emphasis on pathology. It started with Freud and his very negative view of life. And it was reinforced by insurance companies paying to treat pathology, but not paying to help people flourish and become happier and healthier and more successful. So I decided I'm going to turn the ship around and establish a new field of positive psychology. In the meantime, I wrote a book on what you can change and what you can't. And I wrote Authentic Happiness, about what you can do to be happier and more successful. And then Chris Peterson and I did a monumental study in which we identified 6 character traits and 24 virtues. And we did a lot of research on what goes into those so we can learn how to hone those character traits and those virtues. And then last year I wrote Flourish, which placed even more emphasis on a sense of purpose. Well, that's Martin Seligman. In my mind, he should be on the Mount Rushmore of psychologists with Freud, Pavlov and Skinner, he turned the ship around to be more positive. He created a new field of psychology, and then he populated that field with high-quality research. And then he taught us how to use that research in very practical terms. Seligman is only 69 years old. I don't think we've heard the last from him. If you want good advice, research-based advice on how to improve your life, how to flourish, is Martin Seligman.